Hello, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, where in today's video, I'm taking you through from start to finish my exclusive notes of the ACCA SBL exam for the March 2025 sitting for the charity Historic Places. My name is James, and if you'd like access to my exclusive notes so you can follow it through with the video, click the link in the description of this video and you can download a copy yourself. You'll also see that I'm associated and affiliated with Astranti, where they offer mock exams and pre-scene analysis packs I'd highly recommend you check out. If you click the links down below again, that could be the difference in getting you the 50 plus. And for pure transparency as always on the channel, if you were to purchase anything, I'd be entitled to a small percentage which goes to supporting the channel on there. So a massive thank you. I hope the video helps. Get comfy, make some notes, and also I'd recommend that you just follow it through, listen away. There are so many details, but it could be the difference in getting you over the line on there. So this is where we find ourselves at the start. But starting on the contents page, if I was in your shoes, how would I go about this? Well, first of all, you can see there are 5 parts in the contents page that I've separated out. We've got the introduction, the sector information, historic places, the website extracts, and the financial and non-financial information. I break those up into whether you like to use paper notes or Excel tabs, whatever it may be. It's just so that if you come across anything else you want to add to it, it just goes into one of the folders. Keep it simple on there. The next things we have in my notes on here at the bottom, there are some key SBL corporate governance key areas that you just need to be aware of, that they love to throw them in, or you could apply them in your answer. Now, some of these are more likely than others. As I've said on previous videos, I don't have a crystal ball, but hey, we'd better note it down. Now, in terms of the actual historic places and their structure, we'll come on to it later on in the video in terms of the trustees and the board of executives. And they have agency theory in the SBL syllabus, which is all about the relationship between the shareholders and the agents on there. In other words, the managers who run the business day to day. Now, we don't have that kind of structure here because we have a charity. We don't have shareholders involved, but nevertheless, there is still the board of trustees who are not paid. We also have the executive directors who are paid. And then on top of that, we have the people who put money into the charities as well. These are the contributors, which we'll come on to. So again, it's not a likely area, but definitely worth noting down. The next one is for stakeholder theories, a lot more likely, because in the pre-scene notes, we are given a breakdown of the stakeholders and their different areas, and then it goes into more detail later on. So 100% make sure you've got stakeholder theory down, considering both internal and external stakeholders. Last but by no means least, CSR aspects in terms of the responsibility and benefits to society. A lot more likely than agency theory, as I've touched on before. They've mentioned stakeholders throughout, and CSR has also come up in the website extracts later on in the video series. So again, check that out. It could be an area linked to sustainability, green energy, and other CSR factors. The next thing on my notes you can see on the left-hand side are the professional skills marks. In your exam, there are 80 technical marks, 20 professional skills marks. Do not overlook these. Make sure you've got them down in your notes. Analysis, commercial acumen, communication, evaluation, skepticism. The key ones where students tend to get the 0 to 1 mark are commercial acumen and skepticism. With skepticism, you have to challenge the requirement and the exhibit which you've been given on the exam day. And commercial acumen is all about applying your answer back to the scenario. So in this case, referring to the charity sector and the examples that we've got on here in terms of historic places and any other charities thrown in the mix. The ACCA Code of Ethics is another area that going into your SBL exam, you've got to be on top of it. Please expect the Code of Ethics to come up somewhere, or for you to have it in your arsenal going into the exam to apply it to certain requirements. Throughout the pre-scene notes, we're given hints and flavours as to, this could lead to a confidentiality breach or a questioning of someone's integrity. And that's where key thing for your notes here is It's understanding the 5 different areas you can see: integrity, objectivity, professional behaviour, professional competence and due care, and confidentiality. But it's applying it to the scenario and applying it to the requirement what was set, and that is what is going to get you the marks on there. So make sure you've got those key factors down. Coming on to the first area now for the introduction. You see we've got historic places on there, and it is a charity, kind of set up like the National Trust. You'll see it as we go through the type of actual objects and sites that they look after. Throughout my notes, if you've downloaded a copy, ACCA is the country where they are operating, and the reason why I've highlighted them is super key because the markers love it when you refer to the company or the actual country directly. You might get the spelling a tiny bit off, but they will take that into account, and it's a case of it's so much better than you referring to them what their names are rather than it or they. And you've got my little references on there when they talk about preserving the historical sites in ACCA, castles, museums, objects. And an interesting note on page 6 is that they don't do religious historical sites. Again, just something to note down. You could throw it in your answers, but it's just one of those things. Why do you think they've mentioned it? Could throw it up in a exhibit on the exam day. Now, in terms of ACCA, the actual sector information, this is where we're going to pick up on our commercial acumen marks, applying this in the exam in our answers. And we're told that charities on here, again, it does what it says on the tin. You can read through these in your own time, but if you're following my notes, everything underlined are sort of the key terms that I'd be looking to apply in my answer. So if you're a charity in ACCA, like any other country, it's the welfare of society, public interest, sick and disabled people, helping them out, providing poverty relief, education, preserving history, a variety of different things that affect society, and campaigning to help it get better, or in other words on there. Then we come on to when the charities are raising funds. This is through a variety of different methods, and usually it's all about donations. You'll see it later on about the commercial activities and how they raise the funds. We've been given some nice diagrams on there. But the key thing, the last sentence in the overview of charitable sector paragraph, is the charitable sector includes large national charities and smaller charities which operate on a single site. For your notes, make sure you've got it down. Historic Places has hundreds of sites. It is a large charity, and we're coming onto it in a moment, that they also need to have an audit. So that just really sort of sets the scene, because we're going to get into more detailed areas now about the charity's legal position. And this is all still in ACCA, and they are often set up as companies limited by guarantee. So charities are often set up as companies limited by guarantee. And the key bit there, you can see in my notes, key definition: a company limited by guarantee does not have any shares or shareholders, linking back to agency theory we just touched on. It is underwritten by guarantors who guarantee to pay a specified amount to settle any debts only in the event of insolvency. Any surpluses that are not distributed to guarantors, so in other words, if you were invested in a company, they would maybe distribute dividends if they had the available funds. This is not the case in the charities, but what we're looking at here is invested in the charity to help promote its charitable activities. They can actually reinvest the funds in what the charity does on that. The other factor to note down in your notes is that we are not actually told who the guarantors actually are for historical places. So again, another major factor for you to consider that could come up on the exam day. We then get onto the likes of the charity's actual activities on there, and it's determined by their governing document on there, so a constitution. But many charities raise funds by the means of surplus funds from commercial activities. This is like, you've got to picture it in your head going into your SBL exam. They're running shops on there, and commercial activities are carried out through subsidiary companies which charities wholly own. And this is where, for your notes, it's really important you get down that for historical places on there, or historic places, it actually is a company limited by guarantee. I know it says charity, but for the terminology they're using in the preceding notes, That is how they are operating. You'll see it later on. There's a couple of other paragraphs to take you through it. Now, when it comes to the charity regulation, you've really got to get your head around this as to charities in Edisia are regulated by the Charity Supervisory Board, the CSB. Make sure you've got that down in your notes on there. And this is all about control and authority, a really important section here, that you've got all these subsidiary companies, as they put it. It's an extension of the charity. They are actually governed by Edisia's central government, and that is set up by the Charity Supervisory Board. They are also one of the stakeholders listed later on. And this is where the CSB aims on here to ensure that the general public who donate to charities on there actually see that their funds are used for proper charitable purposes. And so the CSB investigates allegations that the charities are not acting in accordance with their charitable objectives. And this is where the ethical side comes into it, as to making sure that charities are behaving, well, making sure they are not behaving unethically, to use the words in the preceding notes. They're not misusing funds or breaching any regulations. Those are three different areas that could be thrown in with an ethics question potentially. It then links on to the content of the charity's accounts is governed by a statement of recommended practice. In other words, if you see anything on the exam day that does not align to the CSB and the statement of recommended practice, this is where you could refer back to it on there, because Historic Places on here actually has and meets the requirements that charity accounts have to be audited if their annual income exceeds over $10 million on there. Historic Places actually goes well over on there. They need to have an audit. And the key bits for your notes on here, so they need to report on internal control and risk management systems, with the report being reviewed by the charity's external auditors. So key things for your notes: internal controls, risk management systems. I'll link it back to the CSB and the statement of recommended practice. Charities and commercial subsidiaries wholly owned by charities are not subject to taxation in Edisia. So that's really just to make sure that you don't make any mistake, that they're not going to have to pay any corporation tax on there. In terms of the heritage subsector now, and this is where many charities in Edisia exist for the purpose of preserving the country's actual heritage, and this links into the mission and values you'll see on page 6. But what does that actually mean? Well, it's all about the historical or cultural value, and is it worthy of preservation on there, because it takes a lot of time, effort and costs to actually preserve these actual sites and artifacts that they have in their possession. The charities in the heritage subsector conserve and maintain historical sites, that's buildings, museums, objects on there. And in terms of the heritage charities, they aim to bring the history to life for visitors. In other words, the general public on there, they want to see some appreciation, the participation in heritage. These are external stakeholder groups that you should refer back to when the public visit the sites, and work for charities if they're volunteers on an unpaid basis. So that is no cost to the charity. They're an advocate for the activities, and there is the same terminology on page 9 in the website extracts, what they look for. We then come on to, on the left-hand side, the other heritage charity factors. So it links into education on there, school children, different stakeholder groups like students, and a number of charities provide training in conservation and other activities. So again, really important on there for how the charity operates, who they want to bring onto the sites and encourage donations. With the last key thing being for this section that the two largest heritage charities in Edisia are Historic Places, HP, and they look after sites over 300 years old. Make sure you've got that down in your notes. That could come up on the exam day as a, has the student really understood the criteria and the background and the infrastructure of what historic places actually do, how they operate. Their objects and sites are over 300 years, whereas Living the Past, LTP, which mainly cares for sites that are less than 300 years old. Now, that's another key charity name to remember. It's the only time it's come up in the pre-seed materials. And I put down in my notes on here, what about a potential merger or a joint venture together? Because how do you know what happens if you've got a object that's, say, 290 years old or 295 years old? Do they pass them over to one another? Surely if they combined all their resources, there would be synergies and benefits that could occur from that. And again, it could be a nice link to sort of maybe a SWOT analysis question on there as well. Let's move on to the heritage charity's significant stakeholders, a critical part of the pre-seed notes, so make sure you've got a pen and paper to get these down. We've given a breakdown, as you can see on the left-hand side, so we've got everything from the trustees, executive management. I'd be, if I was in your position, making sure that you can picture all of these different stakeholder groups, whether they're internal or external. And the other little factor I put on the side there is, are the stakeholders paid or not paid? And the pre-seed notes, they tend to refer to that the general public don't like to see that charities are being a bit wasteful with their donations and money. And if you're getting paid and you're working for a charity, that could come back to haunt you on there. So again, that's why I've noted it down. We have the trustees that are the first significant stakeholder group, should I say. They are not paid, and you really need to go through these and properly understand the roles, responsibilities, accountability of each of the different groups. And the key roles are pointed out for each area. So the trustees are individuals who oversee a charity's activities, and they are responsible for the charity's objectives and constitution and compliance with regulations. They should ensure the control and risk of management systems and making sure that it's effective, that the charity is being managed with honesty and integrity to develop the strategic direction with the executive management. Now, I know that's a lot to take in, but there are so many different areas there that overlap with risk and ethical areas and the accountability side, because we've got the income is dropping off in the charity. So they are a massive part, the trustees, in the performance. Trustees are accountable for the activities, which again links into the expenses and income on there. And we also have there the charity supervisory board and the general public. There's a little bit in blue, which we'll come on to later on, but do not forget or overlook the different areas, especially that charity supervisory board, because that could link into maybe penalties, fines, or who knows, a lawsuit. I'm thinking of worst case scenario now. Again, they've noted there, trustees are not paid for their time and receive no employment benefits. In other words, they're doing it out of the goodness of their hearts on there. Maybe it's a charity close to their hearts, but they have lots of accountability to the performance. Coming on to now the executive management, and again, if you go to, I think it's page 6 or 7, you can see the breakdown of the members who are on the board, and they are employees, so paid to be responsible for the day-to-day operations. They normally meet regularly and as an executive board or committee. So we have remuneration committees, audit committees. We're not told who's on their committees, but the executive management are critical to how the business operates operationally. There are also other paid employees on there. So paid employees include the head office administrative staff and staff working full or part-time on the sites. We have later on in the notes a lot more of a breakdown, but there are over 4,000 employees. It is a big job running this charity on there. And remember, they are paid, which takes away the donations because they are costs associated to the charity. We next have the volunteers, which they have over 20,000 of them. You'll see that later on again, page 6 or 7, where we have more details of the stakeholders. And volunteers carry out unpaid work on there in their spare time and have no contractual obligations to keep volunteering. There are hints as you go through as to they could just cancel any time. They could just stop doing it. The charity Historic Places are very, very reliant on the volunteers because they are the reason why people come to the site, spend the money, and the charity keeps going. There are also donors as well who give money to charities without expecting anything in return, and donors may give a one-off or regular basis. Again, an external stakeholder group, and they are critical to the finances of the charity. There are members as well, and they pay an annual fee or a one-off fee for lifetime membership, giving them the privileges to use the sites, go to see the objects that may be new for the charity. So the most important privileges that these members actually get are free admissions to the sites. They've paid their annual fee or the one-off lifetime membership. Again, linking to that sort of national trust setup on there. And the final key thing, don't overlook this, is that they also have on there the voting at the charity's annual general meeting, the AGM, and this includes electing trustees. So they do have a bit of say involved. Members do not own the charity and do not have any responsibility for its debts on there. So they are not the guarantors. Members are not the guarantors on there. We're not told who the guarantors are, but it's definitely not the members. We then come on to non-member visitors, and they pay admission fees to have access to the sites. I mean, if you've not paid for the membership fee, you're going to have to pay a one-off fee to come along on the day. We then have the guarantors. So guarantors guarantee a specified amount to help settle a charity's debts if the charity becomes insolvent, but are generally not otherwise involved with the charity's activities. So again, we're not told who the actual guarantors are. Maybe that could be something that could come up on the exam day just to be aware of on there. But I think it could be a point that could throw lots of students off if you've not read the pre-C materials in enough detail. We then have the Charity Supervisory Board, that's the CSB we've touched on, and they act on behalf of Odyssea's government in overseeing the charity's activities, and they are actually inputting a audit on historic places because they go over the threshold. So again, if you need to refer back to that, it's on page 2. All the details are there for the CSB, and they're not mentioned anywhere else in the pre-C materials. The last bit on this page for number 3 is really, really interesting as to, they've just got a little bit at the bottom there for media. And stories in the media can illustrate the good charity work that they're doing. However, it can also be a source of bad publicity. For example, stories about charities wasting money. So again, could be an exhibit on sort of social media, news articles. The reason why I say that is later on in the notes, you'll see we've got website extracts, but it's all about finding out who is paid, who isn't paid. That's why I've noted it, and highlighting that wasting money point on there. And the bit in blue I touched on before is all about stakeholders who give money or non-financial resources. Donors, volunteers, members on their non-member visitors are sometimes known collectively as supporters of the charity on there. So I've got that down as supporters of a charity. Again, could be a term used in a requirement on the exam day that could throw off someone who has not analysed the pre-C notes in enough detail. So it links into not just the actual people who donate on there, but it's also the volunteers and the non-members, a variety of different stakeholder groups. We can then come up to the heritage of the charity's income, and as you would expect, income and expenses or expenditure go hand in hand. And you can imagine that you can picture it in your mind. If you're a charity, how are you going to earn income? Well, you've got the donations, membership, admission fees, commercial activities, all the different bits in bold on there. And focusing on the key bits I've underlined in red, that'll be some of the different factors for you to consider in your answers. But about finding new ways to obtain donations, what they're getting at on there is that if they actually go through someone who's already a donor, they're more likely to respond via post, email and text, or maybe actually recommend a friend or a family member to sign up themselves. So charities encourage donations by advertising, adverts, television, social media on there. They also have on their websites, they can donate on there as well. And charities retain contact details of previous donors and focus marketing campaigns on obtaining further donations from them. So on one side, yes, they've donated before, they might be able to recommend the charity. However, you think to yourself, where are the alarm bells ringing from that? Well, what if the data and information of all those people who have donated gets let out into the public domain through a cyber data breach, something like that? Or what if there was a social media or adverts or newspaper article that showed historic places in a bad light. These are things that rattle through my mind, that you could go, on your exam day, something bad is going to happen, and that could fly up on there, as to linking into areas that could impact on the income of the charity. It should be flare up. I've just remembered what I've just said. But we're getting on to membership, admission fees, commercial activities. Again, they've touched on it before. Membership fees, charged to non-members. The bit where we've got a lot more detail is the commercial activities. So you've got the smaller sites that have a sort of little cafe in it, and sell the odd little bits and bobs. Whereas you've got the larger sites, which are proper larger meals on there, hospitality events, corporate events, weddings. And I've linked it into, well, what is more profitable? Is it worthwhile having some of these smaller facilities open? And is it a potential opportunity in a SWOT analysis to mention? Most of the sites actually have shops on there, as we touched on. They have a sort of guidebook and a variety of different products, linking into a cost-benefit analysis that you could pop in your analysis on an evaluation question to say, is it worth it? I mean, they also mention about branded with a charity's logo. How key is the logo? It's not mentioned before. And lastly, for the income, diversifying the income streams, that we also have the operation of their shops, which are not at all of the sites. Some are actually in shopping areas on there. And some charities also sell shop products online. Again, another SWOT analysis opportunity area that have historic places considered all of their different revenue streams. When it comes on to the heritage of the charity's expenditure now, so this is where, again, it does what it says on the tin, as you would expect, but the key bit for your notes is have a look at the chart on page 10. The site operating costs and the site maintenance and conservation costs and administrative costs are all on that diagram, where we're not given the exact figures, but rough ballparks are that the site operating costs, those are the day-to-day running expenses, staff, wages, is about $375 million on there. The middle costs of sort of maintaining the age and condition of the actual sites and the objects is about 290 on there, and this is undertaken by the charity's employees or contractors, or maybe even a one-off project. So again, this is where, because some of their actual artifacts and sites that they're looking after, they're over 300 years old, they're going to require a lot of cash, and the older they get, the more they're going to need to be maintained, and the more money they're going to need to do that. When it comes to conserving historical objects, as we've touched on, it's very complex, hard to find and source specialists. So again, the specialist areas and the contractors should be down in your stakeholder list to say, if we lose them from the books, it could be only going one way in terms of the actual charity on there for maintaining a good portfolio of places moving forward. And last but by no means least, we've got the administrative costs. So this is other costs associated with fundraising, that's the sort of marketing, admin side of it, the salary costs of the executive management, a variety of different areas, but charities can suffer bad publicity and attract less support if admin costs are believed to be too high. That is the second mention about costs and bad publicity that we've been told in the pre-scene notes, so make sure you note down that point about social media, potential news articles. Even though it's the lowest cost, that is one that is really prominent as to, well, what do people who are associated with the charity on there, what do they actually want to go and have a look at? The last part in terms of the income and expenditure, we have the Heritage Charities Challenges. Now, this is where, again, could link into a SWOT analysis, but little to no control over some of these costs, as they're going to increase anyway. As we touched on before, the older the objects on the site, the higher it's going to be. And we have areas like deterioration of sites and objects. It's really hard to preserve them. Natural conditions. There are some aspects about climate change and accelerating it on there. But the bottom line is we have wear and tear. It affects the sites. And if we don't maintain them properly, it could affect the number of visitors to particular locations. On the left-hand side, we have large charities, such as historic places on there. are also dependent on recruiting sufficient volunteers, shall I say, because if you don't have enough volunteers to manage the sites, that is where they're just going to be left on there. Volunteers are unpaid, remember, unpaid, and that saves the charity lots of costs. But the factors for you to be aware of, the variables are the hours and attendance may not be regular, they may decide to stop volunteering on there, and the volunteers are the unique selling point to visitors enjoying the sites. So the heritage charities, they mention it here, face the challenge of seeking donations, and the potential donors are likely to receive communication from many charities on there, and charities which are in the news, particularly in times that may raise considerable sums of money. So if they have a good news article on there, they're going to get more bang for the buck and more donations that come in. But this may mean that donors give less to other charities. So there's an opportunity cost alternative there. And in Odysseus, they're also in a recession, which is an economic factor for a pestle analysis, and has seen a fall in donations. So that means that donors in the past have previously given to historic places, and now they're thinking, well, oh gosh, I need to feed myself. I've got other things to bear in mind. So that is another factor for you to get down in your notes. Students will mess up that it is a recession, will talk about the wrong economic factors, and miss out on marks. So now we're going to be moving on to the Heritage Charities Key Performance Indicators, the KPIs. And you can even see in my notes on here, I put, don't miss this, KPIs are laid out. It doesn't specifically show that KPI in capitals on there, which we're used to. And then the second thing is, with my little a and my little b in my notes, the financial and non-financial indicators, they love to test on the exam day. So if we were to start on the left-hand side, just taking into account the finance areas as you would expect, the income, expenditure, the margins, surplus of incomes on there, a variety of different areas and other income potential opportunities from a SWOT analysis. But we also have an expenditure breakdown on page 10 that actually ranks them through, which we've talked about already in the series on there. When we look at the actual non-financial indicators on the right-hand side, the part B, is that we have data on page 10 about the members, the donors, and the visitors on there. And the things in terms of education, development, conservation, these are all linked to stakeholder theory, and any question you get on the exam day that links to stakeholders, be sure to refer back to if it's financial or a non-financial KPI. In terms of satisfaction, you can see there as a non-financial indicator. For my notes, I've said it's quite interesting to hear the feedback from members and feedback of employees and members renewing, but then we're not given any feedback provided in the pre-seed materials. So again, something for you to get down in your notes that could potentially come up in an exhibit on the exam day and not to throw you off on there. Lastly, at the bottom, we've got the environment points, and this links into the KPIs highlighted, but little to no information provided in the pre-seed information. There are some aspects in the web pages later on page 9 and 10, for you to actually have a look on the website extracts. And there are small parts as to going into green energy. But again, it's a very, very topical area, could come up on the exam day in another actual exhibit. On the left-hand side, before we get into the other elements of the actual charity, we have a few theories that I had to make sure I got down. We have the Johnson, Scholes and Whittington theory, also known as the SAF model, looking at whether is a decision going to be suitable, acceptable or feasible. Now I've put could be applied or tested because it considers are the organisation's goals and strategies actually aligned and acceptable to different stakeholder groups. And that comes up a heck of a lot. So make sure you get that model down. Maybe do a practice question on it as well. Other models, we have the Boston Consulting Matrix. I put this down as not being likely to be tested, as it talks about product portfolios and other aspects like that. When we're looking at a charity, not as sort of likely, a less probability of you being able to apply it or it being directly tested. Lastly, I have down there Porter's value chain from a strategic management point of view and improving the competitive advantage. Now again, it doesn't quite directly fall into a charity on there, but if we're looking at providing a better value for the stakeholder groups and especially the visitors, that model on there could be applied and tested. So I definitely make sure you have that down in your notes on there. Coming on to the right hand side now, we have the historic places, and we have a bit more background information that is imperative for you to get down so you understand the fundamentals and the foundations of this charity. So Historic Places operates in the heritage charity sector, which we've touched on before, but the key bits in my notes underlined in red: it was founded 120 years ago, so very credible, long-standing on there. It's a large charity, so it's going to be actually subject to an audit, and it has around 350 sites that are all over 300 years old. These are castles, museums, but the interesting sort of key factor on there that they have it does not look after any sites with any religious connections, so churches, mosques, for example. Definitely a thing I'd get down in your notes. They could maybe throw it in on the exam day as to other potential new sites that they could look to develop into. But what you should have down in your notes from this part of the preceding notes on here is the pure scale and size of Historic Places. Historic Places on here is a company limited by guarantee. Now I know that's weird to hear because we're dealing with a charity here, but if you look back at the definition on page 2, a company limited by guarantee is an extension of a charity on there, and it's the way that they are structured in ACCA. The senior management and admin staff are based at the head office in the capital city, but we're not told where the capital city is. And we're told on page 7 later on where the best known sites for Historic Places are. It could link into a couple of strategic points for you to mention, or it could come up on the in an exhibit on the exam day. So definitely write that down in your notes. We're not told what ACCA's capital city is. Historic Places commercial activities are undertaken by a subsidiary which HP wholly owns. And again, no name provided for this sort of subsidiary. It's still counted as an outstretched part of the charity. It's just the terminology of subsidiary on there, just to wrap your head around. The next part in terms of the mission and values, absolutely critical for you to actually get down and remember and refer back to on the exam day. The examining team for SBL love to throw in values and mission, where the bits underlined you can see in my notes: permanently protects and preserves sites entrusted to it and promotes interest in and access to them. That is Historic Places' mission. And then in terms of the values, they promote historical truth, accessibility, enjoyment, involvement, transparency, inclusivity, diversity, social and environmental responsibility, and stewardship. In other words, if you get something on the exam day that does not align to the mission, does not align to the values, refer back to those specifically, directly quote it, and use it in most likely in an evaluation question to say, is it a pro or a con? Are they aligned to the correct values and mission on there? The next area is all about governance, and this factors into areas such as ethics on there. But this section you can see in my notes, I'm going to predict that it's going to really maybe confuse some students, especially if it comes up as a requirement on the exam day. Now, the first thing for your notes to wrap your head around is this 2-tier governance structure they have, where on the first tier, pop it in your mind, top tier, we've got the Board of Trustees, and then the tier below that, separate, we have the Board of Executive Directors, where you can see the breakdown on page 7. Now, pop in your mind, we're talking about the Board of Trustees now. They are responsible for the overall control and management of the charity and developing the strategies, consultation with the Board of Executive Directors. So defining those roles and responsibilities, we've also seen this before when they've identified the different stakeholder groups. Sticking with the Board of Trustees, they have an Audit, Nomination and Remuneration Committee. So fantastic for them to have those on there. They are, remember, going to be audited. But the key thing for your notes down there is to refer back to these particular areas. If you get a question on the exam day that links into who they're nominating, about the audit, the salaries of the different staff members, refer to those committees and apply your SBL knowledge there. The Board of Trustees has 9 members, so key when making decisions, because the first area in bold you can see on there is all about the chair. And the chair is appointed by trustees, which they have 9 of them, and does not have a fixed term of office, and therefore historic places members do not vote on the appointment of the chair. So the members are the people who donate to the charity for it, but the appointment of the chair is done by the trustees. There are 9 trustees, so they'd only need 5 out of the 9, the majority, to win the post of the chair. So this is where you've just got to wrap your head around the structure that we have. Maybe you want to draw it down in your notes, anything that can help you to picture what's going on better. We then have nominated trustees and member-elected trustees. So 5 trustees on there are actually nominated by HP's nomination committee. We're not told who is on that actual committee on there, and their appointment is subject to confirmation votes by the members. So that's involving, again, the people who donate to the charity. Their appointment is subject to confirmation vote by their members. If they are confirmed in, they must serve, or they can serve, for 3 years and can seek reappointment after it. So there are caveats and structures in place, but there are not for the chair. There are also member-elected trustees, so this is again by the actual people who donate to the charity, and 3 of the trustees are elected by HP's members at the charity's annual general meeting. And this is where they can also serve 3 years and seek re-election at the end of the 3 years. So that's how we've got 3 trustees member-elected, 5 trustees on there are from the nomination committee, and then the final person is the chair themselves. That's what makes up the 9. The Board of Trustees is supported by a board of executive directors. We're coming on to that now on page 7. And this is where you've really got to get your head around this and do not misinterpret it as to who is on the committee, possible conflicts of interest. We'll go through it line by line because it was hard not to underline most things here. The executive directors are appointed by the Board of Trustees. So this is the executive board on page 7. Maybe I can just scroll it down so you can see them there on the bottom left. HP's members do not vote on the appointment of the executive directors. So that's the finance director, marketing, HR, IT, all of those you can see on the screen. The executive board is responsible for the day-to-day management and operations of historic places, and the executive board is headed by the CEO, Chief Executive Officer. The remuneration of the executive board members, including the CEO, is determined by the remuneration committee, but we're not told who is actually on that committee though. So again, just making sure that you're crystal clear as to the breakdown. You can see on the left hand side, so you've got the CEO and then the 5 directors below. The main thing here is that we've not been given any of their actual names that you can see on the screen there. We've not been told about their responsibilities or accountability, anything on those lines. So again, it could be something that could come up on the actual exam day, just to make sure you have got it all down to a T, you know what they all do. And what I'd be thinking if I was in your shoes is, well, I'm going to interpret the requirement, see which area of the charity is being affected by, and then refer back to that particular officer or director in the executive board structure who should be accountable for it. Now, really interesting point for the code of conduct area you'll see there, where we have a code of conduct is in place that applies to the trustees, executive directors, paid employees, volunteers they're expected to follow. And in terms of this code, it has core principles, professional behaviour, commitment, adherence, decisions made by the board, confidentiality, conflicts of interest, and bribery. However, the important thing for your notes is there is no code provided in the pre-seen materials. Possibly could come up on the exam day, but also could possibly be an area for you to refer to, especially when you're getting hints of ethics flavoured in there, of conflicts of interest, confidentiality, and professional behaviour. So in other words, if a member of the team or a member of the board breaks the code of ethics, refer back to it and be specific in what they've said is in the code on there. As we said, we've not been given a breakdown for it. The only other final bit to consider on here is the acquisition of sites. We're not told who is responsible for this area of the charity and to determine what gets purchased, because you can't just purchase everything that's over 300 years old, which is what historic places deal in. So they acquire buildings and other sites as gifts from previous owners, or by purchasing them using surplus funds on there. So we either are gifted into the charity or we buy them ourselves. And they will only acquire sites which are of a national importance and are under threat of destruction or deterioration over time. And you've got to kind of think to yourself, well, how is that defined? Who's making these decisions to make the purchase to go ahead? And again, that could be something that could come up on the exam day as to who's accountable. What if we purchased, or what if we were gifted a site that drained the cash out of the charity? Was it worth taking on in the first place? Could link into a sort of SWOT analysis on there, or an evaluation point. Now let's move on to the operational activities. And before we even get stuck into anything on there, it's another opportunity for me to throw in a model that could potentially be examined on the March 2025 sitting, and that is the POPIT model. And this is where it's a framework that helps businesses analyze and improve their processes and structures. So this is all about people, organization, processes, information and technology, which when you go through the full analysis and you check out my notes from start to finish, all of those areas, apart from maybe if you use the term organization as charity on there, all come up in one way or another. So definitely consider getting that down in your notes and getting some points under each of the 5 different areas. Now that we're coming on to the aspects of historical places now, it's a site which is open to members and other visitors. This is, in a nutshell, this part of the pre-SEAM notes is your commercial acumen, which is a professional skill mark. You've got to apply it on the exam day and understand how the charity operates. So they have an admission charge. You'll see all my keynotes underlined that you should definitely be aware of, that is payable by non-members. So in other words, I think this is based on the likes of the National Trust. So if you come to a National Trust site in the UK and you're not a member, you have to pay to actually use it and enter. The amount charged varies on the different sites, okay, because some are they vary in size and different times of the year when they're actually open, and the different staffing levels. So this is based on a costing analysis, and that will definitely impact and affect the revenue and profitability of the different sites, because some are closed for longer periods, some require more maintenance, and some have longer or shorter opening hours to be aware of, along with the volunteers and employees of the charity. So historical places actually aims to enhance the experience of the visitors. This is the reason why they come along, and they'll come back again, offering tours and answering questions, on-site information, exhibits, and breakdowns of the site's history. It actually aims to stimulate and encourage the learning of, say, children, the features, the sites, the objects. And in other words, having the right volunteers in place with the right knowledge is absolutely key here. But as we've been told on page 5, they can just unexpectedly leave their role. They have no contractual obligations, and therefore they're an integral stakeholder group to the charity. Then we have the education objective of the charity, so inviting school children, students on there, and making it a special event with performances that really encapsulates the site's history, aiming it at children and families who are likely to come along in bigger groups. But this is again your stakeholder analysis and engagement, how historic places are actually going about managing the different stakeholder groups and getting them to come along again. Because when they are on the sites, they actually have an opportunity to purchase something from a shop. There are different sizes of shops. They have different areas, different levels of stock, catering facilities. They can sit down or take away. The smaller sites only provide snacks, drinks, but the larger sites offer full meals on there. So a key point for you to get down, because we've seen it previously, the larger sites can offer maybe corporate events, weddings. They've got better profitability on there and could be linked into a strength aspect in your SWOT analysis. Lastly, for the operational activities part, we have HP's best known sites. And this includes Mallock, Dogdean, Pengingham, Stowater and Thruworth. Now, Historical Places is a large national charity and they have more than one site, but we're not told if either of these are the capital city or which one's the biggest one. The other thing is to remember the actual names for your exam day on there, because they could easily throw them in a requirement, and a well-prepared student will know that this is the best known site, and you could link it in your analysis. That's going to take us now on to stakeholders, the second part. They've referred to them in the pre-seen notes, hence why I think it's definitely a high percentage chance of coming up on your actual SBL exam, which if it did, it would be like Christmas has come early, because that would be quite a nice topic area to discuss for historical places on there. And when we're coming onto it, this is another potential model that could be put into the mix for you to take the model and apply it to the scenario and the pre-seen information. The model that for you to get down is Mendelow's matrix, and this is all about different stakeholder groups and identifying, do they have high levels of power or low levels of power, and what level of interest do they have in the charity? Do they have low levels of interest or high levels of interest? And probably with me saying this, you're going, gosh, that could definitely come up on the exam, because for each stakeholder group, you would then have to justify and back up, are they a keep satisfied group? Are they key players? Do they require minimal effort, or should you just keep them informed? So the first key stakeholder, to go into a bit more detail, are the members. Again, thinking about the size and the scale of the charity, they have 5 million members, and they offer annual memberships only on there. Benefits of membership include free admission to the sites, regular newsletters, emails, and the right to attend the Historical Places annual general meeting, where they can vote on some of the trustees, I should say. That's where we can see it in the next sentence. They can vote on the appointment of some of the trustees, receive the annual report, financial statements, and approve the appointment of the auditors. So they're part of the process. They have lots of involvement on there, and they can also submit resolutions which are not binding on the trustees, but which the trustees must take into consideration. In other words, looking at the best practices and how the charity can move forward in the best place fitting. So key details you need to make a note of there, especially when it links to Mendelow's matrix model. Coming back up to the top now, we have the other stakeholder groups, the employees, the volunteers, suppliers as well. And the employees, you can see here, they have actually at Historical Places on there, they have 4,000 full-time and part-time employees together. And that is where we actually have who work for the wholly owned commercial subsidiary. This is an extension of the charity, still operating as a charity, it's just the technical name for it. They work at HP's head office or on the different sites on there. Now, the key thing in terms of the employees, some have worked there for a very long time, but in terms of the actual average salaries across the charity sector, they are lower than what would be paid for the equivalent jobs in a commercial organisation. So in other words, if they were to go work in industry or do something a bit more corporate, the employees would get paid more. So that's where, for them to accept the lower salaries and to continue working at the charity on there, they would need to obtain they could obtain these outside the charity sector. And the reason why they actually stay and work for Historical Places is because of HP's mission. What we're actually told about on page 6 about permanently protecting and preserving the sites, entrusting it to and promoting the interests of them, and access. But it says many employees are prepared to accept lower salaries. That is not all of them. So there might be a bit of unrest, but again, if you think about it in context, 4,000 employees, you can't please everyone on there. The other things on there to note, it's more than just a job, and that's where it links into the volunteers. You've got 20,000 volunteers. They play a very significant role, key to the charity's success, as the volunteers act as guides, work in the catering facilities, shops, and maintain the sites. In other words, if the volunteers are not kept happy and they don't like how the charity's being run, then they could quite easily just say, I'm not going to volunteer anymore, and the charity would be in a real pickle there, or in bad. It would be very bad, should we say. And last but by no means least, We have the suppliers and the contractors. They've touched on it in the preceding notes before, and this gives a bit more detail. The choice of suppliers and the inventory policy of the catering facilities and shops is determined centrally by the procurement function of historical places now. We're not told which maybe director who's in charge of that. Maybe we're told that you'd maybe say it was the operations director, but if you are going to assume that, state it to the marker. HP uses external contractors for regular site maintenance, major projects, large and single projects are employed on a one-off basis. So in other words, they get entitled employee benefits. Now I've been told about that the charities can come into a bit of flack for bad reputation if the costs are getting too high and it's money being badly spent. And it's a high cost factor having contractors coming on board, site maintenance, that is all increasing the cost to the charity. We've also got on here some other social factors, and it could link into PESTLE. So the social factors are the people involved, and then we've got the technology factors for PESTLE with the IT systems. And this is really important for your notes, so get this down. Notice how I say this. HP's information systems are adequate for its administration needs. And I've read that and thought, not a confidence building word there about the IT systems, that they're adequate and are fully compliant with data protection regulations. HP's computerized information system covers major organizational functions. And I kind of go, well, if they cover the major ones, why don't they cover all of the operational functions? What is the issue here not to do that? So in terms of confidence and a technology factor for PESTLE, definitely get it down for there. And HP has a website which publicizes its activities and allows donations to be made and members to join. There are separate web pages for each HP site, including details about the site such as history, maps, facilities and news. And you kind of go to yourself, well, why aren't all the web pages, or why are all the web pages on separate sites and not in one together? So why don't historical places just have everything on one website? It would improve the advertising and marketing for the different sites, because if you're going to go to one site, you're most likely going to want to know about more. So again, an opportunity there for a SWOT analysis for you to get down in your notes on there. We then come on to the risks that you can see on the right hand side. So we have threats to reputation, threats to income, loss of employees, insufficient financial resources. It goes on to the next page, but poor performance of suppliers, health and safety, climate, weather, and cyber security. Notice on there, I've got PESTLE all over this, economic factors, social factors. We've got liquidity and cash flow. In terms of the income on there, from threats to reputation. So in terms of bad publicity, this can lead to members not actually renewing their membership or willing to be donating or actually volunteering on there. We also have in ACCA that we're in a recession part of an economic cycle. So the donor's willingness to actually donate is getting trickier and trickier because it's a recession. They might want to put the money elsewhere. And that's where HP sites is one of many leisure activities available to individuals and families, and it has a risk that visits become less popular, reducing income and admissions and commercial activities. So given the economic environment, because more and more people are tight for cash, it makes it harder and harder for them to come to the site and to donate and to put money back into the charity. In terms of loss of employees and the actual volunteers, so employees can leave and cannot be easily replaced. That's all of their experience. And this is going to affect the experience that people have on the sites, and they may be open less frequently. In terms of conservation work, there are specialist staff as well that HP has the ability to carry out work on sites and historic objects, but some staff members have specific knowledge how to do this a lot better. So if you were to lose some of these employees and volunteers, it's only going to have a negative impact on the charity itself. And remember, the volunteers are not being paid. In terms of insufficient financial resources, it does what it says on the tin there. If the income is less than expected, or the costs, which are actually increasing, we'll come on to that in the diagrams below, are going up, HP may not have the financial resources to carry out all the necessary conservation work. they might have to let go of some of the sites, or if worse comes to worse, they might need a cash injection from some of the guarantors. We also have poor performance by suppliers and contractors, which links into if a poor quality job is done, this can reduce visitor satisfaction. Poor performance can also lead to not obtaining value for money and could jeopardize the conservation of the buildings. Not also to mention could be bad publicity if it got out into the public domain and into the press. This also gives me the opportunity to mention about the TARA model possible here, and this is a structured approach and a model about managing risk and classifying the different risks into 4 categories of: can we transfer the risk, can we avoid the risk, can we reduce the risk, or can we just simply accept the risk? And that's why we have the final risks actually here in the risk register, which, coming back to the first sentence, it says Historical Places maintains a risk register at its head office, but we're not told how often they maintain that risk register and by who. So this is charity-wide, these risks, and you have the final ones on here about health and safety, a legal factor potentially here, as when people are visiting and working on the sites, there are potential hazards. So they could slip on surfaces, there are steep staircases, extreme weather on there, creating hazardous conditions. And from a legal factor, from a pestle point of view, you could get a lawsuit, you could get a fine, penalty, and that would impact on the cash flow of the business. There is also climate and weather. So if you get poor weather, it affects poor visitor numbers. Most of these sites, as you would expect, are outdoors and they damage sites on there. So this is all budget related, but be really specific when you're referring to the costing side of it and the implications of the charity as a business. That is where you're going to pick up on those professional skills of commercial acumen. And last one on here, we have cybersecurity, another link to technology factors of the pestle model. There is a risk of disruption on there, administration, the services it provides, leakage of data, loss of reputation, legal action. So again, another legal factor of pestle possibly, and unwillingness of members to donate and provide their personal details because they think, well, what if my details got leaked, and what if those details got into the wrong hands? Now then, let's start to look at the website extracts. The key things for you to get down here are the action points. So the extract covers key actions which Historic Places actually takes, and we're given a breakdown of 6 areas that, again, on the exam day, I'm thinking to myself, if I get anything in the realms of inspiration, accessibility, involvement, engagement, conservation, or sustainability, definitely refer to those extracts you can see here. I've underlined the key aspects of the 6 different areas, but it's worth noting we're only given website extracts. They could throw in on the exam day social media posts, news articles, journals. They love to put those in the SBL exam that refer back to the scenario, so make sure you get that down in your notes and you expect it on the exam day. So in terms of inspiration, it's all about stimulating the visitors' minds and provoking their emotions. In other words, through my eyes, I see that people are then more involved in the charity and hence they're more likely to donate, which is what the charity is looking for them to do. In terms of access, it's all about privilege of standing on the spot where the history has happened and the actual sort of living of our country's story. So linked to that mission and values you'll see on page 6 in the pre-scene analysis notes. Again, just making people feel more involved, and if they're more involved, they're more likely to donate. Engaging and entertaining. This is where they love the time they spend with us, bringing the fascinating true stories to life. That's through the volunteers, creativity and imagination. So in other words, the emotions that drive the donations. But in order to actually put that sort of perspective and feel around the sites, that is where the volunteers are the main stakeholders who put that into practice. In terms of involvement, this is stakeholder engagement again, the belief and opportunities, engagement with the sites and the volunteers and the staff, and they rely on generous support of members, donors and volunteers as we want to build our relationships with them. In other words, if the Board of Trustees, the executive directors weren't to align with those mission and values you'll see on page 6, it would upset the donors, the volunteers, and that would have a crippling effect on the charity. So again, other areas you could link into in a SWOT analysis. In terms of conservation, we are all about protecting the sites and objects which need urgent care. This is where historic places, as we know, only look after these objects and sites that are over 300 years old, and that's all about the preservation and development of their collections, increasing an understanding through their expert research. The only thing to consider there, you can see in my notes, is the cost-benefit analysis, because the older things get, the more expensive they become. Lastly, sustainability, protecting the future of our sites, fight against climate change, greener energy, minimising waste, increasing the use of recyclable resources, and our performance is measured against increasing rigorous sustainability targets. So an environmental point from a pestle analysis point of view here. And we're not given too much in terms of sustainability. There are a few hints of CSR points throughout the pre-C notes, but anything that comes up on the exam day that links into sustainability, the environment on there, resources, that is definitely a point from the website extracts you should be referring to. You can also see at the bottom of my notes on here, I had to get down a few key areas that I thought, I won't be able to sleep tonight if I don't put that in the notes and in the video. Well, we first of all have the 6 capitals of integrated reporting, and this is where they are the basis of an organisation's value creation, and we actually discuss the usefulness of this information to stakeholders. And no doubt you've seen from the pre-scene analysis in these videos and in my notes, there's a lot on stakeholders. And when you see the 6 capitals of financial, manufactured, intellectual, human, social, relationship, and natural capital, there are a lot of points that could go into different areas. So make sure you get down the 6 capitals in your revision. The next area are the 3 E's model, and this is all about discussing the obligations of public sector organisations to meet the economy, effectiveness and efficiency criteria, and promoting public value. And you think to yourself, I could put down a few points there for the economy, about the recession, how effective they're utilising the charity's resources. We've talked about cost-benefit analyses and the efficiency maybe of the different stakeholder groups, especially the volunteers. So again, don't overlook the 3 E's. I think if it was to be tested, it will be one of those models that either students get it and they'll pick up on a lot of marks, or they won't and they'll just throw them away. We can now come on to, on the right hand side, the financial and non-financial information, and memberships that actually, well, they look good in 2003, the first diagram on the right hand side. But remember, for context, we're not given the information from 2002, 2001, 2000 that we can see on the income streams as it was increasing over those years. So we don't quite understand if, say, maybe donations are a bit higher, have admissions changed. And remember, in 2003, it's starting to flatline. We have the recession factor to take into account, and the actual members are thinking about where they're going to donate to charity. Are they going to renew it? Are they going to place it in other charities? That is potentially one of the reasons for that flatlining you could refer to. But again, you don't have to be specific on the figures, but it's just touched over 800 million euros on there, or dollars should I say. And that's the key figure that you want to apply, especially if you want to make an income point. The SBL markers love it if you refer to the actual dollar amounts in your answers. Good grief, I thought I was going to sound like Kevin Keegan there, but if you're not a football fan, you won't get that. But moving on swiftly to operating expenses now, and in fact, I should put the income graph back on, because as you can see, income has not been increasing at the same rate as the operating expenses. And the other thing to factor in there on the right hand side, the split of the operating expenses, the highest expense is the day-to-day running costs and the wages, which is a critical point for you to get down as to that is where we've seen in the pre-C notes that people and the news articles and the media don't like to see charities just frittering away money on expenses and wages that are not adding to the charity's value. So the site operating is the main one, the maintenance and conservation, and the admin being the last. So it's worrying in terms of the viability and the margins of the charity from an operating expense. Again, I'm trying to put in some SBL nice management accounting terms there. But then the final model I've got on here in terms of Porter's diamond model, it's one of those models that always SBL students, they kind of think, oh, it'd be great if that came up. It's nice and easy to break down for it. But in terms of a economy and gaining a competitive advantage on there, and working out if they have any of the factors based on the sort of demand factors, firm strategy, I'd actually say it's not very likely based on the pre-C materials and the fact we're having our first charity tested in the SBL exam from pre-seen information. So Porter's Diamond, obviously be aware of it. I don't have a crystal ball, but it wouldn't be the top of my priority list from a model perspective. Coming on to the left-hand side now, we're looking at the number of visits and the number of members. And it's worth noting, don't overlook it, that the number of members is on a positive trajectory. It's going up. The number of visits, members and non-members, is going up. The key thing on that members and non-members graph, though, is we're not given the breakdown as to how many are members and how many are non-members on there. And maybe questions you could ask in the exam if it was an area of the requirement, and this is where your professional skepticism could come into it. How can they monetize it better? Is it going to continue on this upward positive trajectory in a recession marketplace at the moment? And in terms of the number of members, it's slightly flattening as well, a bit like what the income curve was doing on there, and relating that back to the economic climate of a recession. The last things you can see on the left-hand side now are some other critical models and theories you have to be aware of ahead of your SBL exam. The first one being the pestle analysis, where you'll have seen previously in the video. I've highlighted in my notes, so check those out. Make sure you download a copy in the description of this video because it takes you to the specific areas. And to be honest with you, we have factors that cover all 6 areas on there. So we have some actual political and government interest, there's regulation, there could be things like local authorities you might get given more on the exam day. Economic wise, we've got the recession as we've talked about and impacting on the charitable donations dropping slightly. Social wise, we've got the large amount of volunteers and full-time paid staff, potentially trade unions, they always like to throw that in somewhere. Technology, we've had the information systems, data risks, cyber attacks, and the website could have some development. Remember, they've got the different sites in different places, not all in the same place on there. In terms of the environment, increased stakeholder awareness. They've talked about green energy in the website extracts. And lastly, potential lawsuits, non-compliance, fines, data risk, misuse of charity finances and data on there, potential injuries on some of the sites. All of these things could link into a pestle analysis, and therefore it's not a guarantee that it could come up, but it does have a lot of areas you could talk about. You'll see in my notes below for Porter's 5 forces, I've got it down as being hard to see to be tested. Again, competitive rivalry, supplier power, buyer power, substitution, threat of new entry. It just doesn't come across as the type of pre-seed information of the charity sector. And the fact we've only been given 2 charities, one that looks after objects and ornaments are over 300 years and one that looks after objects and sites under 300 years. So again, not really much to talk about, but again, you'd be silly to not have it just in case, but it'd be very hard to see how it could be aligned. But as always, with every single SBL exam, SWOT analysis can be applicable whether it's a PLC, a new business, a charity on there. The strengths identified is that it's an established charity over 120 years. It's already got heritage itself, variety of sites across the country. You know, we're still talking, it's over $800 million just in income. So put it that way, they're doing pretty well. But in terms of weaknesses, the decreasing drops in donations is one worry. We also have the increasing costs. The sites over 300 years old mean that the sites and the objects are only going to get older and they're only going to cost more to maintain. Opportunities wise, the better functionality of the website I've got down here, maybe diversifying the donation revenue streams, new members on there, new sites, new objects they've hinted at. There's a variety of different topic areas for you to discuss. But the main one for your notes, the main one are the threats, such as loss of staff and volunteers. We've got the economic climate on there of a recession, cash flow or working capital management, cost benefit analysis, poor margins on there. There could be other upsets in the charity sector. We've also had about they're going to be audited. What happens if there was some corruption found out in the charitable annual report? There's a variety of different things, and that's why SWOT analysis has to be on your list, that you have points under each element on there. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to the end of my full pre-scene analysis. The last thing I can say is best of luck with your upcoming exam. I'm going to take you back up to the top because these are my exclusive notes. As I said, if you'd like a copy, just click the link into the description of this video and you can access one there. You can also find all of those Astranti mock papers, pre-scene analysis packs. Click the links down below. You won't regret checking those out. They're only going to help. And be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on any future videos. So best of luck with your exam. Hang around till the end of this video. I'm going to put another one up at the top now in the series. So I'll see you on the other side now. Thank you very much.